Sir, I'm going to stop you right there. The voice belonged to branch manager Curtis Hale, and it arrived across the marble lobby of First Consolidated Bank of Harlan, Kentucky. The way cold water arrives when someone tips a glass, sudden, a little shocking, designed to produce a particular effect. Hale was 34 years old, in a charcoal suit that had not been purchased on a branch manager's salary, and shoes that had been shined that morning in his car using a kit he kept in the console. He was standing behind the service counter with his arms folded and his weight forward, the particular posture of a man who believed that the arrangement of his body communicated authority. The man he had stopped was named Earl Gideon, and he was 83 years old. Earl Gideon was wearing work boots that had lived 2 lifetimes. The leather creased and split at the toe, the soles worn to near smooth along the outside edge, the laces replaced so many times the eyelets had begun to tear loose from the upper. His jeans were faded past color into something closer to the memory of color. Above them he wore a canvas work shirt in olive drab, soft with washing, the chest pocket repaired with a neat row of stitches in thread that almost matched. Over his shoulders hung a barn coat, brown corduroy, the collar dark with years of weather. He carried no briefcase, no folder, no phone visible. He carried a small paper envelope, the kind that banks give you when you request a printed statement, folded once and held loosely in a hand that was mapped with the wrinkles and liver spots of 8 decades of living, and perfectly, absolutely steady. He had walked 11 blocks from the bus stop. His boots made a sound on the marble that was different from everyone else's shoes in that lobby. Not louder, but more deliberate, like a man who had learned long ago that the ground beneath him was not always solid and had never stopped testing it. He did not look up when Hale spoke. "There's a dress code for private banking consultations," Hale said, unfolding his arms to gesture, briefly and dismissively, at the space between himself and Earl Gideon. "It's posted at the entrance. Business attire. If you're here for a teller transaction, the windows open at 9. You'll want to get in line." Earl Gideon stopped walking. He looked at the paper envelope in his hand for a moment, unhurried. The lobby of First Consolidated Bank of Harlan was the particular kind of impressive that smaller city banks sometimes achieve by spending money in the wrong places. Marble floors that were genuinely marble, brought in from somewhere that wasn't Kentucky, and track lighting angled at the ceiling with the precision of a museum. And behind the service counter a series of framed photographs of the town at various points in its history. Coal cars and main streets, and the faces of men who had built things. The air smelled of floor cleaner and paper money, and, faintly, the coffee that the tellers brewed in the back room for themselves and sometimes offered to clients they recognized. It was 10:47 in the morning, and there were 3 other people in the lobby. A woman at the ATM, a young couple waiting at a teller window, and a man in a down vest, reading something on his phone by the door. There was also a young woman seated behind a second desk near the far end of the counter. Her nameplate reading Amber Kettrick, Personal Banking Associate. She had an open file in front of her that she was no longer reading. "I have an appointment," Earl Gideon said. His voice was a low, unhurried thing, rough at the edges the way old wood is rough, but carrying clearly. 9:30. I called ahead. "Mr." Hale glanced at his computer screen, a gesture that managed to be both perfunctory and theatrical. "Gideon, yes, your 9:30 was rescheduled." "Didn't you receive the call?" Earl Gideon's eyes, which were pale blue, the color of a winter sky seen through old glass, came up from the envelope and settled on Hale with the calm patience of a man who has waited in worse places than this, for longer than this. "I did not receive a call." Well, Hale spread his hands in the gesture of a man distributing blame into a neutral universe. "These things happen. If you'd like to reschedule for next week, Amber can find you a slot." But you'll need to call first." He paused, and something moved through his face, a flicker of satisfaction that he did not fully suppress. "And I'd recommend wearing something a little more appropriate. This is a private banking suite, not a—" He allowed the pause to do its own work. "Well, you understand." Behind him, from somewhere back in the service corridor, one of the junior loan officers, a man named Brady who had been at the bank for 3 months and who had been listening since the moment Hale's voice changed register, made a sound through his nose that he quickly rerouted into a cough. Earl Gideon looked at Curtis Hale for a long moment. His expression had not changed. It was the expression of a man watching weather, patient and observant, not interested in arguing with the sky about what it was going to do. The appointment was for a wire transfer and an account review, he said. He set the paper envelope on the counter between them, precisely, as a person sets down a thing they have been carrying for a long time. "I drove 2 hours to get here. The regional manager, a woman named Patricia Souls, called me personally last Tuesday to set this up." Hale looked at the envelope without picking it up. "Patricia Souls is the regional director. She doesn't personally schedule branch appointments. She does when the account merits it," Earl Gideon said. His voice contained nothing that resembled anger or complaint or any bid for the listener's sympathy. It was simply a sentence, accurate and flat, the way a carpenter says a measurement. Something shifted in Hale's face. Not yet retreat. Not yet understanding, but the very early arrival of a question he had not known he needed to ask. He looked at the envelope again. "What account number?" he said. Earl Gideon told him. Hale typed it. He looked at the screen. He looked at it for what would later be agreed, by everyone who witnessed it, to be approximately 6 seconds of absolute stillness. Then he looked back at Earl Gideon, and the expression on his face was the expression of a man whose internal model of a situation has just been replaced by an entirely different situation, and the replacement has been neither smooth nor comfortable. He stopped. His voice had lost something. "I'm going to need to verify. That's fine," Earl Gideon said. He stood with his hands at his sides, one still holding the paper envelope, and waited. The young couple at the teller window had stopped their transaction. The woman at the ATM had finished whatever she was doing, but had not left. Amber Kettrick, at the far desk, had fully closed her file. Hale typed something else. Read something else. His jaw moved once, without producing sound, in the manner of a jaw that has received information it was not prepared for, and is taking a moment to pass it along to the rest of the face. Then he looked up, and something about the shape of his eyes and the set of his mouth had reorganized into an expression that was no longer what it had been, and he said, at reduced volume, and with the specific stilted quality of a man using a register he has not practiced recently, "Mr. Gideon, would you perhaps like to come back to my office?" Earl Gideon picked up the paper envelope. "I would," he said. He followed Curtis Hale through the door behind the counter, and the lobby settled into a different kind of quiet. Not empty quiet, but the specific, charged quiet of people who have just witnessed something they are still calculating. Amber Kettrick opened her file again. She did not read it. She was thinking about the look on Curtis Hale's face when he had read the account number. And she was thinking about the worn-out boots on the marble floor. And she was thinking about something her grandmother had told her once that she had not fully understood at the time. She picked up her phone. The number she dialed was not the number of anyone at the bank. It was the personal cell number of Patricia Souls, regional director, which Amber had because Patricia Souls had given it to her 6 months ago with the instruction that if anything ever felt wrong at this branch, Amber should use it. Amber had not used it until now. "This is Pat," said the voice on the other end, not the regional director voice. The other one. The voice of a woman who answered her personal cell on the third ring. Miss Souls, it's Amber Kettrick at Harlan. I'm sorry to bother you. I wanted to let you know that Mr. Gideon came in for his 9:30. He's back with Curtis right now. The silence on the other end was sudden and complete. It lasted 3 seconds. When Patricia Souls' voice returned, it was a different voice, crisp and direct and moving faster than the first one. How did Curtis treat him, Amber? Amber said. Carefully. I think you should come. The silence this time lasted only 1 second. I'm already in Lexington. I'm 2 hours out. Yes, ma'am. Is Mr. Gideon all right? Amber looked at the door through which the worn-out boots had disappeared. He seemed fine. He always seems fine. That's kind of the, yes, ma'am. He's fine. You tell Curtis that meeting does not end until I get there. Do you understand me? Nothing gets signed, nothing gets transferred, nothing moves. Tell him I said so. Yes, ma'am. The line went quiet for a moment. Then Patricia Souls said, in the tone of a woman who has made a decision she knows she should have made earlier, I'll call the chairman's office on the way. The chairman of First Consolidated's parent company was a man named George Birch, who had personally managed Earl Gideon's account since 1987, when a retiring colleague set a file on his desk and said, "Read this before you agree to anything, and after you've read it, call me." George Birch had read it and called and listened for 40 minutes, and then sat at his desk for a while. He had managed the account quietly for 38 years, because Earl Gideon had asked him to, and because Earl Gideon had been clear about what he wanted, the same ordinary human courtesy extended to everyone else. When Patricia Souls reached him, he listened without interrupting. When she finished, he set down what he was holding. The branch manager laughed. He said, "Yes." He was quiet for 1 second. "Get me a car." In Curtis Hale's office, which smelled of new carpet and the particular artificial freshness of an air purifier working too hard, Earl Gideon was sitting in the client chair across from the manager's desk with a paper envelope in his lap and an expression that had not varied in temperature since he had walked through the bank's front door. The chair was expensive leather, soft and low, the kind designed to make visitors feel slightly less than the person across from them. Earl Gideon sat in it the way he sat in every chair, without accommodating it, simply occupying it, his back straight, his hands quiet, as rooted as old timber. Curtis Hale was being different now. He was solicitous and warm, and making the particular verbal movements of a man operating in reverse, working backward from condescension toward courtesy, and finding the road unfamiliar. He had offered coffee twice. He had said Mr. Gideon 4 times in 2 minutes. He had explained the rescheduling as a clerical error of the most regrettable kind. Earl Gideon was listening to him with the patient, faintly tired attention of a man who has had many versions of this exact conversation, and long ago stopped being surprised by it. Hale was reaching for the wire transfer documents, the reason Earl Gideon had driven 2 hours on a Tuesday morning, when his eyes went to the old man's hands on the envelope, and something caught his attention. The right hand had a scar that ran from the base of the thumb across the back of the hand and disappeared beneath the cuff of the olive-drab shirt. Pale and old and wide, the kind of scar that is not the result of an accident. He looked away quickly. Then, because he was the kind of man who filled silence with performance, he said, "So, Mr. Gideon, have you been a customer here for long?" 38 years, Earl Gideon said. "And before that, were you in business? Locally?" Earl Gideon looked at him with the pale blue eyes that had the quality of something very old and very deep contained behind a clear surface. "No," he said. "I was in the army." Hale nodded with the polished enthusiasm of someone who has learned that veterans are worth acknowledging. "Well, thank you for your service. My cousin was in the National Guard. 2 years, I think. Or maybe 3. That's fine work," Earl Gideon said, without edge. "So after the Army you went home," Earl Gideon said. "Built a house. Put some money away." He paused. "And some more money. And some more after that." The room was quiet for a moment. Then something happened that had been gathering since Hale had read the account number on his screen. Since that 6-second pause that everyone in the lobby had clocked, and no one had yet fully decoded. It came in the form of a memory, not Earl Gideon's this time, but the weight of what lay behind the number on the screen. And it pressed into the room through the old man's stillness, the way cold presses through a wall in January. In 1967, Earl Gideon was 24 years old. He was not in Kentucky. He was in the Central Highlands of Vietnam, on a ridgeline that had no name on any map he had access to. In a monsoon that had been going on for so long, it no longer felt like weather, and had simply become the condition of the world. He was the senior surviving ENSO of what had been a 12-man reconnaissance patrol, and was now 5 men and a radio that worked intermittently. The helicopters could not come in the rain. The helicopters had not come for 31 hours. He had used the last of the morphine on Private Delray Moore, who was 19 years old and from Harlan, Kentucky, same as Earl, and whose right leg below the knee had been addressed by a field dressing that needed to be changed and could not be changed because the supplies for changing it were gone. Delray Moore was conscious and had not made a sound in 4 hours, which was not because the pain had subsided. Earl Gideon had been talking to him for most of those 4 hours. Not about anything. The way you talk when talking is the thing itself. About the creek behind his parents' house. About the high school gymnasium where they had both played basketball at different times. About the color the hills turned in October above the coal seams. He had Delray's head in his lap and his hand on the boy's arm, and he talked until the rain let up enough that the radio crackled with something recognizable as a human voice. They got Delray Moore out. They got all 5 of them out. Delray Moore walked in the Veterans Day Parade in Harlan, Kentucky in 1971 on 2 legs, which was because of a field dressing that had been changed after all. Earl Gideon had found a way, and because of 31 hours of a voice in the rain that had refused to let him go. He never told anyone what those 31 hours had cost the man who kept talking. Some prices you pay privately. That is simply what they are. The Distinguished Service Cross that Earl Gideon received for the actions on that ridgeline was in a box in a drawer in his house in Harlan. The Silver Star from the action 8 months later was in the same box. The 2 Purple Hearts were in the box. The commendation from General Westmoreland was in the box. He had never displayed any of them. He had never spoken about them to anyone except Delray Moore, once, in a diner on the eastern edge of Harlan, in 1974, over coffee, after which they had split a piece of pie and talked about something else. The money in the account at First Consolidated Bank of Harlan, Kentucky, had been built across 50 years of careful work and careful living, and the kind of patience that belongs to men who have waited in worse places than a bank lobby for worse outcomes than a rescheduled appointment. It was not a number that belonged to a man in worn-out boots, according to every assumption that Curtis Hale had been trained by his particular life to make. It was not a number that belonged to a man who rode the bus. It was not a number that belonged, in any way that Hale's imagination could reach, to any version of the person who had walked across that marble floor. That was not a problem with Earl Gideon. The sound of the lobby doors came first, not a dramatic arrival. Simply the pneumatic rush of glass doors opening and feet on marble, but a particular configuration of feet, because there were a lot of them. And they moved with a purposeful synchrony of people who have somewhere to be and no interest in slowing down for the furniture. Curtis Hale's office had a glass panel beside the door that looked into the back corridor, and through it he could see people passing. More people than should have been passing, moving in one direction. His intercom buzzed. It was Amber. "Curtis, Miss Souls is here." And "Curtis, Miss Birch is with her." The silence that produced in Curtis Hale was not the professional pause of a man composing his thoughts. It was the silence of a man whose chair has just dropped out from under him. "Mr. George Birch?" "Yes," Amber said, in the careful voice of someone delivering information they did not select. "He drove up from Lexington. He'd like to come in." Curtis Hale stood. He looked at Earl Gideon, who had not moved. "Please," Earl Gideon said mildly. The door opened. Patricia Souls came in first, 61 years old, in a charcoal jacket she had driven 2 hours in, with the expression of a woman who had arrived knowing exactly what she was going to find and had not been wrong. Behind her, George Birch. He was heavy-set and silver-haired and wore the quietly authoritative suit of a man who has spent 40 years in rooms where the furniture costs more than cars. But it was not his suit or his title that changed the atmosphere of the room when he stepped through the door. It was the way he looked at Earl Gideon. George Birch looked at Earl Gideon the way you look at someone you have spent 38 years being trusted by. With gratitude, and with something that was adjacent to awe, the particular variety that accumulates slowly over decades when you have been privy, through numbers on a page and occasional brief phone calls, to the quiet shape of a man's whole life. He crossed the room and shook Earl Gideon's hand with both of his. He said, "Earl, I am sorry about this morning." "It's all right, George," Earl Gideon said. His voice was the same as it had been since he walked in the door, unhurried, unperformative even. George Birch turned. His eyes settled on Curtis Hale with the quiet, total attention of a man who has found the source of a problem and is making notes. "Curtis," Patricia Souls said. Her voice was professionally controlled in the way that sometimes makes things more serious, not less. "Mr. Birch is going to take over Mr. Gideon's appointment this morning. I'd like you to wait in the conference room." Hale opened his mouth. He closed it. He opened it again. "I, of course." He looked at Earl Gideon with the expression of a man who has a great deal to say and has just understood that none of it is appropriate. "Mr. Gideon, I apologize for—" "It's all right, son," Earl Gideon said. Not warmly, but not coldly. The way you might say it's all right to someone who has stepped on your foot. Direct acknowledgement without theater. Hale left. The proceedings that followed took 3 hours and were not uncomfortable. The wire transfer was completed. The account review was conducted by George Birch personally, with Patricia Souls present, and the conversation between the two old men, who had managed their long financial relationship by telephone and occasional letter for nearly 4 decades, had the comfortable ease of people who know each other in the way that only time and trust produce. Formal review of Curtis Hale's conduct began the following Monday and concluded 3 weeks later. He was not terminated. He was reassigned, at his own level, to the bank's Community Lending Division, where his responsibilities included, specifically, working with veterans organizations and small business applicants in eastern Kentucky, applicants who frequently arrived in worn work boots and did not carry visible signals of what they were worth or what they had done. It was not a punitive assignment. It was the kind of assignment that either changes a person or confirms what they already are. That outcome would belong to Curtis Hale alone. On the first morning of his new position, he was given a file. Inside the file, as part of an orientation document, was a single type line that someone in the Community Lending Division had added long ago and never taken out, The person across from you carries more than what you can see. Begin there. He read it twice. He thought about a marble lobby and the sound of worn-out boots. 6 weeks later, on a Thursday morning in October, Curtis Hale was getting coffee at the diner on the east side of Harlan when he saw Earl Gideon in a booth by the window with a cup of his own and a newspaper he was reading the way people read newspapers when they have nowhere to be, with full attention, working through it methodically from front to back. Hale stood at the counter for a moment. Then he walked over. Earl Gideon looked up from the paper. He regarded Curtis Hale with the pale blue eyes that did not hurry. "Mr. Gideon," Hale said. "I wonder if I could, if you had a minute." Earl Gideon folded the newspaper precisely and set it beside his coffee cup. "Sit down," he said. Hale sat. He was thinner than he had been, the suit jacket replaced by a regular jacket, and something about the way he held himself was different. Not smaller, but differently arranged. The posture of a man in the early stages of understanding something he previously thought he already knew. "I've been thinking about what I said to you that morning," Hale said. "In the lobby. About what you were wearing. About—" He stopped. He tried again. "I had no idea who you were." "I know," Earl Gideon said. "I shouldn't have needed to know," Hale said. "That's what I've been sitting with. I shouldn't have needed a number on a screen to." He stopped again. Earl Gideon looked at him across the table. Outside the window, the October hills above Harlan had gone the color that the hills go in October above the coal seams, the red and gold of it running up the ridgeline, and it was the same color it had been every October of Earl Gideon's 83 years, steady and indifferent to everything that had happened beneath it. "Every person who walks through a door," Earl Gideon said, "has done something in their life that you wouldn't believe if they told you. Something hard. Something that cost them." He paused. "You start from that. You don't wait for the proof. You start from that, and you'll be all right." He reached for his coffee. Outside, the hills burned quietly on. Hale looked at him for a moment. Then he said, "Thank you." Earl Gideon nodded once without ceremony. He picked up the newspaper again. After a moment, Hale raised his hand to the waitress and ordered coffee, and the two men sat in the booth by the window, while the October morning moved around them, and the hills above Harlan kept the color they keep every year, whether anyone is watching or not. Some people walk through this world carrying more than the eye can find. The quiet ones, especially, the ones in worn-out boots, the ones who already know what they're worth, and have never needed a lobby to tell them. If you were moved by Earl Gideon's story of quiet dignity and hard-won wisdom, hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and be sure to subscribe to Veteran Valor for more stories of America's unassuming heroes.